Hi, students. This is Dr. Rebecca Barrett-Fox, your instructor for Introduction to Sociology. In this first module, we're going to examine a foundational concept in sociology, the sociological imagination. This concept is going to come really fast to some folks, and for others, it's going to be something that we might need to review a few times. Maybe all semester you'll need to review it. That's okay, because all semester we're going to be practicing returning to the idea of the sociological imagination as an explanation for how people interact with each other and interact with their social world. So if you don't get it this first lecture, it's okay. Read the chapter, reread the chapter, re-listen to the lecture, but know that we're going to practice it over and over. Sometimes it can be something that you catch for a little bit and then also gets fuzzy later on and you need to return to it. So don't be afraid to come back. But before we get into detail about what the sociological imagination is, I want to ask you a question.
Do you believe in love? Do you believe in love? Do you believe it's true? Do you believe in love? Oh, you better believe it too.
All right, I wanted Huey Lewis to ask you a question. That was from Huey Lewis in the News' 1982 hit, Do You Believe in Love? So tell me, do you believe in love? I mean, romantic love. Maybe not for yourself, maybe for yourself, but in general. Right? Even if you don't, could you just play along for this lecture and imagine that you do believe in romantic love? Because lots of people do. So let me ask the question, why do we fall in love? Why do birds suddenly appear every time you are near? That's another song. So, what explains why people fall in love? Is it emotions, feelings? Is it biochemistry, like hormones? Is it genetics? Do we have a genetic drive somewhere in us to pair up? Is it fate, the universe, the stars? Like Shakespeare says in The Merry Wives of Windsor, in love, the heavens themselves do guide the state. Is it God or the supernatural? These are words you might have heard if you've gone to a Christian wedding. They're quoted in the wedding ceremony, and they come from Jesus in the book of Mark, which is part of the Christian scriptures. What God has joined together, let not man separate. Some version of that. You have underpinning this the idea that God brought these two people together. Does that explain love? Well, sociologists have their own explanations, and I'm going to offer just two of them here. Proximity and similarity. Proximity means how close are you to someone? And sociologists would generally argue that you have to be close enough physically and socially for you to have a relationship. And of course, we can imagine in the day and age of telecommunications and the internet that people can meet online. But eventually, if you're going to have a paired up, lifelong, permanent relationship, most people for the duration of that will need to have some kind of physical proximity. And there has to be social proximity. It's not enough for you to be standing next to each other. You also have to be socially close enough to each other to have some kind of connection. So, for example, two people could work in the same building, but if one's the CEO and one's the janitor, even if they're standing next to each other in as they enter the building, socially they're not going to be close enough to each other to get to know each other. And in cases like that, we often actually physically separate those two, right? At hotels and large office buildings, you might have a service elevator that we expect the hotel staff, the maids, the janitors to use, and maybe a service entrance where they go. A high-end hotel or a high-end business building might not want those employees walking through the front door. So even though physically these people might be just a wall apart, one person working in one room and one person working in the other, they might even pass each other, right? The CEO could come in while the janitor is changing the garbage. Even though they have that kind of physical proximity, socially they're not close enough. And then there also has to be similarity. Now, how much similarity and which similarities we have done a lot of research on. But generally, what there are some pretty clear patterns. You have to have similar sexuality. That is, heterosexual people marry each other, pair with each other. Of course, we can find exceptions to this. There'll be couples where one person is bisexual and one person is not. But generally speaking, people are going to have the same sexuality. They're going to be about the same age. They're going to be about the same height and weight and general attractiveness. We say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but there are patterns of what a culture considers attractive. People who are considered at kind of equal levels of attraction will generally pair up with each other. Generally, people marry within their ethnic and racial groups. They actually typically marry someone who shares politics and who shares core key values, and generally speaking, people who share religion. Um, there is variation, of course. And in sociology, we're interested in those exceptions. We're not talking about hard and fast rules. There's always the lady who marries the tramp, right? Like in the classic Disney animated film. And we see it all the time in real life as well. Here's just one example. Supermodel Jerry Hall, excuse me, who had been previously married to Mick Jagger. She's a big model in the 70s. Married Rupert Murdoch, the Fox news magnate. He was 25 years older than her. I think she was like maybe his fourth wife. They divorced in 2022. They were not married all that long. But he was 25 years older than her. And so we can find couples where there's a large age gap, or of course, where there's an ethnic and racial difference. People do marry outside of those boundaries, but the typical pattern is for people to marry within their groups. So that's a sociological explanation of how people find each other, but it's not very satisfying. We tend to like pop culture explanations better.
You are too generous to trifle with me. If your feelings are what they were last April, tell me so at once.
My affections and wishes are unchanged. But one word from you will silence me on this subject forever.
Oh, my feelings. My feelings are... I'm ashamed to remember what I said then. My feelings are so different. In fact, they are quite the opposite.
Well, there it is. The second proposal, there is a first failed proposal of Mr. Darcy to Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice. In this case, the 1995 BBC film version of Jane Austen's novel. And if you don't know the story, Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy are very different classes. He falls in love with her, and she's insulted because he's not very much of a gentleman, even though he has lots of money. She rejects him the first time, but over time, she falls in love with him. And we get our happy ending. We like that kind of story. We like Lady and the Tramp. We like star-crossed lovers like Romeo and Juliet. We like it when opposites attract. But again, that's not really how sociology works. Sociology instead offers us the sociological imagination. In the pop culture imagination, commoners marry princes, like Princess Diana, who's in the picture here in her wedding dress. She wasn't royalty, and then she married Prince Charles, now King Charles. And that was a fairy tale wedding. But for the most part, that's not how marriage works. Commoners marry commoners, and royalty marries royalty. And the sociological imagination helps us understand why. Your sociological imagination is your ability to see how social contexts shape individual experiences. I mentioned earlier, this is harder or easier for some of us. I'll say it again. Your sociological imagination is your ability to see how social contexts shape individual experiences. So how are you and how are other people, Princess Diana, Elizabeth Bennet, how are you shaped by the contexts you're in? Our contexts make some things possible for us and some things impossible for us. Even though she was a princess, Princess Diana could never become the president of the United States of America because we have a law, which is part of society. So you have to be born an American citizen to become president. So all around us, there are social forces, laws, traditions, stereotypes, family pressures, religious obligations that shape the kind of choices we get to make. Now, in the US, this can be very hard for us to recognize because in America, we have a tradition of believing that we're all self made. And so if it feels a little uncomfortable so far to hear this, that's okay. You can let it be uncomfortable. There are some times when we get to choose the social forces that shape us. So we get to choose in the US to be part of a religious group or not. But of course, if you're growing up in a family that is religious, you're not choosing that for your family. And that social force is still shaping you. This isn't a bad thing. So, as you're thinking about the social forces that shape you, understand we're going to engage them critically. That is, we're going to think about them hard. But we recognize that this can have do a lot of good in the world. But we can also start to see pretty quickly how those social forces can lead to bad outcomes. Well, the sociologist C. Wright Mills, who's an early sociologist, said it this way: neither the life of an individual nor the history of a society can be understood without understanding both. That is, society is made up of individuals, and those individuals shape society, and society turns around and shapes those individuals. We're going to spend our time this semester thinking about that interaction, how we shape our society, how our society shapes us. And if we recognize that we shape our society, it means we can shape it into a different direction if we want to. In this module, you're going to learn more about the sociological imagination, including how to cultivate your own. You're going to learn more about what kinds of questions sociologists think about and about the history of sociology. I want you to ask yourself, is it hard or easy or hard for me to see how society influences me? Do I think that society influences me more than, the same as, or less than it influences others? What sociological forces are most influential over me? We expect these to change over the course of the lifespan. And what kind of sociological questions am I interested in asking? Well, as always, I'm here to help.